Episode 1. Diego Andrés Morales. The first thing they took wasn't my freedom. It was a certainty. Not the handcuffs. Not my phone. Not even my wallet. It was the quiet confidence that, somehow, someone would realize there had been a mistake. I was born here. That sentence played on an endless loop inside my head as the white transport van rumbled over cracked pavement. I was born here. The words stopped sounding like facts and started sounding like prayers. No one answered either. 20 minutes earlier, I had been sitting in the tire shop's break room with my phone open on Grindr. The room smelled like burnt coffee, old rubber, and the cheap pine air freshener somebody sprayed every morning to hide the rest. Fluorescent lights hummed above the stained table. My screen showed the usual grid of faces: cropped torsos, bathroom mirror selfies, the occasional dog or half-eaten plate of food. A calendar reminder slid down over the app. Mom's doctor appointment 4 p.m. I smiled the way I always did when her name appeared, typed "got it," and locked the phone. The appointment was only a checkup. Carmen Morales never missed one, and she never let me miss the reminder. I was 20, almost 21. I still believed the small routines would last forever. Outside the window, the July sun turned the asphalt into a soft black mirror. I could hear the hydraulic lift sighing in the main bay and the radio playing an old Mexican song with trumpets that the older guys liked. I had spent the morning logging invoices, the quiet office work that required English and a willingness to stay invisible. Under the table pay, cash every Friday, no questions asked. It was the closest thing to stability I had managed since high school. The agents came in through the open bay doors like they belonged there. 2 of them in dark jackets, badges already out, moving with the calm of people who had done this many times before. They asked for documentation. Most of the guys had something: driver's licenses, work papers that looked official enough if you didn't look too hard. I had nothing. I never had. My mother had explained it once, crying at the kitchen table the year I tried to get a learner's permit. The words had felt like someone pulling a floorboard out from under my feet. After that, I stopped asking. I worked. I stayed quiet. I told myself the system was too big and too slow to notice one tire shop kid in Cleveland who kept his head down and answered every question in perfect Midwestern English. They noticed. The handcuffs were plastic, the kind that dig if you pull against them. One of the agents said my name wrong, Diego, and I corrected him automatically, the way you correct a teacher on the first day of school. Diego, I said. Diego Morales. He didn't answer. They walked me past the lift where old Mr. Ruiz was still under a car, past the front counter where I had been entering numbers an hour earlier, past the open bay doors into heat that felt like a physical slap. My co-workers watched. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything loud enough to matter. Luis, the guy who always shared his lunch, looked at the floor and kept looking. I wanted to call out to him, tell my mom, but the words stuck in my throat like something solid. The van had blacked out windows. Every turn blurred into the next until I couldn't tell north from south. Across from me sat a man old enough to be my grandfather, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Beside him, a teenager kept rubbing his wrists where the plastic restraints had already left red grooves. Nobody talked. The only sounds were the engine, the air conditioner fighting the summer heat, and the occasional crackle of a radio from the driver's seat. I rested my forehead against the cool metal wall and tried to remember the last normal thing I had done. Scrolling through stupid videos, complaining about the inventory software that crashed every other day, laughing with my best friend Marcus over bad tacos 2 nights ago, the kind of laughter that makes your stomach hurt in a good way. I didn't know those little moments could disappear forever. She's gonna call the hospitals first, I thought. Then the police. Then my friends. She's gonna think I got hit by a car or jumped or something. She's going to lose her mind. I wondered if my mom had started calling hospitals yet. She would. That was who she was. If I didn't answer one text, she would send 5 more. If I missed dinner, she would call before my food got cold. Now my phone was gone. She would think something terrible had happened. She would be right. I closed my eyes and saw her the way she looked most mornings in our small kitchen. Left sleeve of her blouse pinned neatly where the arm used to be, the stump of her forearm still strong enough to steady a cutting board while she chopped onions with her right hand. The accident had happened when I was 14. A harvesting machine on some farm 2 hours outside the city. They told us later the blade had caught her sleeve and then her arm and then it was simply gone. She never talked about the pain. She talked about the bills. My father worked double shifts at the mechanic shop after that. My brother Mateo enlisted in the army, with papers that weren't his so he could send money home every month. I stayed quiet and learned to do the books at the tire shop because English was the one currency the system still accepted in cash. Spanish had always been the language of secrets in our house. My parents spoke it on the phone with relatives, whispered it when they thought I was asleep. They raised Mateo and me in English on purpose. Assimilate. Have a chance. Don't stand out. I answered them in English even when I understood every word. Now English felt farther away than home. I should have learned better Spanish, I thought, the regret sudden and sharp. I should have answered them in their language. I should have asked more questions. I should have. The van stopped. Heat slammed into us like opening an oven when the doors finally opened. One by one we climbed out. The building in front of us wasn't home. It wasn't familiar. It wasn't anywhere I had ever imagined I would be. An officer called my name. Or at least he tried. Go. I stepped forward. He handed me paperwork. Most of it was in Spanish. I stared at the pages. I recognized words. Not enough of them. I need to call my mom, I said. The officer didn't answer. I was born in the United States. No answer. My family's there. Please, just let me tell them where I am. He motioned for the next person. Just like that, I stopped being someone with questions. I became someone holding papers. Outside the building, the afternoon sun felt almost cruel. Cars rushed past. People laughed somewhere across the street. Life kept moving as if mine hadn't just been erased. I checked my pockets out of instinct. Empty. No phone. No charger. No wallet. No cash. Nothing except the folded papers they had given me. I unfolded them again. One sentence stood out. Guatemala. I blinked. That couldn't be right. I had never been to Guatemala. I had never even been to Colombia. The only country I had ever called home was disappearing behind me, farther away with every passing hour. This is a mistake, I told myself. Someone will fix this. Someone has to fix this. A bus roared by, shaking the sidewalk. I watched it disappear into traffic. For the first time in my 20 years, I had absolutely nowhere to go. And the sun was beginning to set. They put me in a holding cell that smelled like bleach, fear sweat, and the metallic tang of old handcuffs. The fluorescent lights never dimmed. Somewhere down the corridor a radio played static and the occasional burst of Spanish too fast for me to catch. I sat on a metal bench with my back against the concrete wall and tried to make the papers make sense. Guatemala. The word kept rising off the page like heat. I traced the letters with one finger the way I used to trace the outline of Ohio on classroom maps when I was a kid. Cleveland. Lake Erie. The Flats. The neighborhood where every house had a chain-link fence and a plastic Virgin Mary in the front yard. That was the only geography that had ever mattered. I remembered the first time I understood I wasn't supposed to be here the same way other kids were. Sophomore year. Driver's ed forms. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table after Mateo had gone to bed and told me, voice shaking, that I couldn't get a license, that I couldn't apply for financial aid the normal way, that the papers she and my father had used to get us this far were not the kind of papers that lasted. She cried into the sleeve of her good blouse, the one she still wore pinned closed on the left side. I had hugged her and said it was okay, even though nothing felt okay. After that, I stopped dreaming out loud. I worked. I dated carefully on the apps. I kept my head down. Now the head-down strategy had run out of road. A guard came by with a clipboard and called names. When he reached mine, he didn't look up. He just checked a box. Can I make a phone call? I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. He kept walking. Across the cell, the old man from the van was praying under his breath. Lips moving in a rhythm I recognized even if I didn't know the words. The teenager had fallen asleep with his head on his knees, one sneaker half off. I watched the rise and fall of his shoulders and felt something tight and useless in my chest. He's younger than me, I thought. Maybe 16. What happens to him? I had never been the kind of person who knew what to do in a crisis. My crises had always been smaller, broken apps, bad dates, the occasional argument with my father about why I wasn't more like Mateo. Mateo. I wondered if anyone had told him yet. He was somewhere overseas, sending money home every month like clockwork. The last time we had talked he had asked if I was still playing the field on the apps and then laughed when I told him about the guy who showed up to a coffee date with his mother in tow. Mateo had always been the one who made space for the parts of me that didn't fit the family story. He had been the first person I told, at 16, sitting on the roof of our building with a stolen six-pack of cheap beer. "Okay," he had said after a long silence. "Don't let Mom find out the hard way." Then he had ruffled my hair the way he used to when we were kids. I would have given anything to hear his voice right then. "Mateo, I'm scared," I told him in my head. "I don't know where I am. I don't know what's happening. I don't know how to fix this." Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time had already started to stretch and fold in ways I didn't trust. They moved us again. Another hallway. Another set of doors. Another room with more fluorescent light and the same institutional smell. An officer sat behind a glass partition and slid a form through the slot. More Spanish. I pointed at the word Guatemala. "I don't understand," I said. "I'm American. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. My parents are Colombian, but I was born here. I have never left the country except for one school trip to Chicago. Please, I need to call my mother." He looked at me the way people look at a problem that isn't their problem. "Your parents are Colombian. You have no documents. Mexico is not responsible for you. You will be processed for removal. From Mexico you will transit south." Transit. The word sat in my mouth like something bitter. "I need to call my family," I said again. "Please, just one call. They don't know where I am." He shook his head and motioned for the next person. Outside the processing area, the sky had gone the color of old bruises. They loaded us into another van. Smaller this time, more crowded. I ended up pressed against the window. Through a gap in the blackout film, I could see highway lights sliding past in long white streaks. I tried to count them the way I used to count fence posts on long car rides when I was little, but the numbers kept slipping. I thought about my father's hands. Calloused, always greasy from the shop, always fixing something. He showed love by tightening bolts and replacing water heaters in the apartment building so the rent stayed low. He had never asked me about girlfriends. The silence between us on that subject had always felt like its own kind of conversation, something understood but never spoken. "Dad," I thought, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. I should have." The van stopped again. This time the building was larger, more institutional. Chain link. Razor wire catching the last of the light. The kind of place you see on the news and never expect to walk into yourself. They processed us one more time. Fingerprints that left black smudges on my skin. Photographs under harsh light that made my face look like a stranger's. The same questions in the same flat tone. When they asked for an emergency contact, I gave my mother's number from memory. Each digit pulled up like a tooth. "Carmen Morales," I said. "That's my mom. Please call her. Please tell her I'm okay." The officer typed it in and didn't look up. I was given a thin mattress that smelled of industrial detergent, a scratchy blanket, and a space on the floor of a larger holding area. Dozens of men. Some sleeping with their faces turned to the wall. Some staring at nothing. The air was thick with the smell of bodies that hadn't washed in days and the low murmur of languages I only half understood. I sat with my back to the wall and pulled my knees up, trying to make myself smaller. Somewhere in the middle of what might have been night, a man near me started crying quietly. No one told him to stop. The sound settled into the concrete like it belonged there. "I want to go home," I thought, and the simplicity of the sentence almost broke me. I just want to go home. I closed my eyes and tried to picture the last normal morning. Coffee in a paper cup. The radio in the tire shop playing something with trumpets. The way the light came through the bay doors in long golden rectangles that made the oil stains on the floor look almost beautiful. I had been thinking about maybe asking one of the guys from the app to get drinks that weekend. Nothing serious. Just something to do on a Friday night when the city felt big enough to hold every version of me. All of that felt like it belonged to a different person now. I whispered my own name under my breath just to hear it. Diego Andrés Morales. Born Cleveland, Ohio. Son of Carmen and Jose. Brother of Mateo. The kid who was terrible at Little League but whose father never missed a game. Standing behind the fence with grease still under his nails. The kid who learned to do inventory and scheduling because English was the only currency he had that the system still accepted under the table. The kid who scrolled through dating apps on his lunch break and still made it home in time to remind his mother about her doctor appointments. None of that was written on the papers they had given me. Only Guatemala. And the slow, certain knowledge that the country I had called home my entire life had already started erasing me. One form, one transfer, one unanswered question at a time. Morning arrived without ceremony. The lights never changed, so the only way to know time had passed was the shift change of the guards and the arrival of plastic trays with food that tasted like nothing. Beige, warm, forgettable. I ate because the old man from the first van, Hector, told me in careful English that I should. "You have to eat," he said. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. Even when you don't want to, especially then. He had been in the States for 32 years. He had 3 grandchildren in Dallas who called him abuelo on video chats he could no longer answer. He spoke about them the way other people speak about weather, something constant, something that continues even when you are not there to see it. "I was born in Cleveland," I told him. He just nodded like he had heard the sentence 100 times already and knew how little it weighed here. "I know, Mijo," he said. "I know." They called names again in the afternoon. When they called mine, I stood up too fast and the room tilted. A guard walked me down another hallway to a small room with a metal desk and a map of the United States and Mexico taped to the wall, edges yellowed and curling. The officer behind the desk was younger than the others. He looked tired in a way that seemed permanent. "Do you understand what is happening?" he asked. "No," I said. He sighed and explained, slowly, as if speaking to a child, that I was being removed. That because of my parents' nationality and the absence of valid documents, the process would take me through Mexico. That from there I would be expected to continue south toward Guatemala, and eventually arrangements would be made regarding Colombia. Colombia, a country I had never seen. A country that existed only in the stories my parents sometimes told when they thought I wasn't listening. Stories about mountains that turned blue at dusk, about rain that fell for days, about a house that no longer stood and relatives whose faces I couldn't picture. "I need to call my mother," I said. My voice cracked. "Please, she doesn't know where I am. She's going to think I'm dead." The officer looked at the file, then at me, then at the file again. "Your emergency contact has been notified of your detention," he said. "That's all I can tell you. Notified." The word was supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. Felt like a door closing somewhere I couldn't see. They took me back to the holding area. I found a spot against the wall and sat, the thin mattress doing nothing against the cold concrete. Hector was gone. Moved somewhere else or released or simply disappeared into the machine the way people seem to. The teenager from the first van was still there, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I closed my eyes and tried to remember my mother's number digit by digit. The way you remember a song you haven't heard in years. The numbers came back slowly, painfully, one after another until the whole sequence felt solid again in my mouth. "Mom," I thought, "I'm still here. I'm still me. Please don't stop looking." I thought about the last time I had seen her. 2 nights before the arrest. She had made arepas the way she always did, one-handed, the motion so practiced it looked easy. The smell of cornmeal and cheese had filled the small kitchen. She had asked if I was still thinking about community college, about becoming an accountant the way I used to talk about when I was younger. "Yes," I had said, even though the money wasn't there yet and the papers never would be. She had smiled with the half of her face that still believed things could get better. The half that hadn't been worn down by the years of seasonal fields and the machine that took her arm. I wondered if she was smiling now. Night came again, or what passed for night under the fluorescent lights that never turned off. I lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, counting the small brown water stains the way I used to count stars from the roof of our building with Mateo. Somewhere far away my father was probably still working, hands deep in an engine, grease under his nails, believing that hard work was the only answer to any problem. Mateo was probably still sending money that would no longer be enough. My mother was probably calling every number she could find, her voice getting tighter with each transfer, each hold music, each person who said they had no record of me. I had become a gap in the system, a missing file, a name that existed in one database and not in another. I sat up after a long time and looked at the map on the far wall of the holding area. Someone had taped it there years ago. The edges were yellowed and the colors faded. I walked over, stepping carefully around sleeping bodies, and stood in front of it. Cleveland was a small black dot near the lakes. The border was a thick line far below. Beyond that, Mexico stretched south in pale colors, then Guatemala, then the rest of the countries I had only ever seen on the evening news when the stories turned bad. I traced the distance with one finger, from the little dot of Cleveland down through states I had never visited, across the thick black line, into the pale expanse that was supposed to be temporary. It looked impossible. I don't know how to do this, I thought. I don't know how to be this person. I don't know how to survive without them. I pressed my palm flat against the paper map and closed my eyes. The surface was cool and slightly rough under my skin. I was born here. The words still sounded like a prayer. No one answered. In the morning they would move me again. Another van. Another set of blacked-out windows. Another country that had never claimed me and did not want me now. The papers in my pocket already said Guatemala. The system had already decided the shape of the next days, the next weeks, the next impossible choices. But for this one night, in this one concrete room under lights that never turned off, I was still Diego from Cleveland. Still someone's son. Still the kid who used to fall asleep to the sound of his father fixing things in the apartment below. The quiet metallic clink of tools that meant everything was being held together. Still certain, in the smallest and most fragile way, that the world would eventually correct its mistake. That someone would look at the file and see the birth certificate that existed somewhere, the childhood that had been entirely American, the life that had never left Ohio except for one school trip to Chicago. I held on to that certainty the way you hold on to the last warm thing in a cold place, cupped carefully in both hands, afraid to breathe too hard in case it went out. I held it while the man near me cried himself quiet. I held it while the lights hummed and the air conditioner rattled, and somewhere far beyond these walls my mother was almost certainly still dialing numbers that led nowhere. I held it until sleep finally took me, thin and restless, full of the sound of a van engine and the taste of plastic restraints and the single word that kept rising off the page like heat. Guatemala. And when I woke, the certainty was already beginning to leave, quietly, the way light leaves a room when someone closes the door from the outside. I was still here, but the version of me that had believed the system would notice its own mistake was already somewhere else, walking away down a highway I couldn't yet see.